What would you do if the only thing your father left you in this world was 2 silver coins pressed into the palm of your hand and a worn Bible with its cover half torn away? 20-year-old Sarah Brooks buried her father on a wet Tuesday in Ash Hollow, and the whole of her inheritance came to exactly 2 shillings and a book of scripture that smelled of coal smoke and rain. The village laughed, the solicitor closed his ledger, and Sarah walked home in mended boots through the churchyard mud. But what she would find hidden inside that Bible 3 nights later would turn every whisper in Ash Hollow on its head. Settle in. Stay close. Let us know where you're listening from tonight, and keep the lamp trimmed, because this story only begins when the rain begins to fall. The cart set her down at the crossroads a little after 4, and Sarah walked the last half-mile on foot because she had not the coin to ask the driver further. The hedgerows dripped. The lane held pools of standing water, the color of weak tea, and her skirt, already heavy at the hem, drew up more weight with every step. She carried a single canvas bag. Inside it were 3 folded dresses, a comb of horn, a tin cup, the Bible her father had pressed into her hands the night before he died, and the 2 shillings knotted into the corner of a handkerchief. Ash Hollow sat in a low fold of ground between 2 gray shoulders of hill, the way a coin sits in the cup of a hand. Slate roofs, a crooked spire, a row of shuttered cottages leaning toward one another like old women sharing bad news. Smoke from the forge drifted sideways in the damp. Sarah had been gone 4 years, sent as a girl to a household in the next county to earn her keep after her mother died, and the village that met her now looked smaller than the one she had left, and meaner and more watchful. She went first to the churchyard. Her father lay under a mound of turned earth still dark from the morning's rain. No stone yet, only a wooden marker with his name burned into it in a shaky hand. Thomas Brooks, beloved. She did not weep. She had spent her weeping already, on the coach and in the vestry and on the walk from the coach. She only stood a long while with her hand flat on the wet earth, and felt the cold come up into her fingers, and said nothing at all. When she raised her eyes, an old woman was watching her from the lich gate. Bent, wrapped in a gray shawl, one hand on the timber post as if she needed it. Sarah did not know her. But the woman lifted her chin the smallest degree and spoke, and her voice was thin and level, like a note held on a tin whistle. "Read the pages he marked, girl." Sarah opened her mouth. The old woman was already turning away, moving into the mist with the slow economy of the very tired, and by the time Sarah reached the lich gate, the lane beyond was empty. Only the hedges and the drip, and a rook lifting from a yew tree with a wet complaint. She walked into the village. The solicitor's office stood above the wheelwrights on a narrow flight of outdoor stairs, and Mr. Harrow received her with the expression of a man who has already added up a sum and found it disappointing. He was thin, dry-mouthed, dressed in a coat too fine for the room. He gestured her to a stool. He did not offer tea. "Miss Brooks?" he said. "The estate." "Yes, sir." He turned the ledger. He turned it back. He cleared his throat as if to make the moment official. "Your father left debts to the miller and to the coal merchant, both discharged by sale of his tools and his cart. What remained, after burial, comes to 2 shillings and this." He laid the Bible on the desk between them. It made a soft, dull sound, the sound of a thing that has been carried a long time. "That is all, Mr. Harrow said. There is no property. There is no annuity. There is no chest of plate in the loft, whatever the village may whisper. Your father died a poor man. I am sorry for it." Sarah placed her fingers on the Bible. The cover was leather once, now the color of wet bark, and the spine was cracked, and a strip of linen had been sewn along one edge by a hand that was not skilled with a needle. Her father's hand. She recognized the ugly, honest stitches. He had mended it himself. "Thank you, sir," she said. "Miss Brooks." Harrow hesitated, and something almost human moved behind his eyes. "There is a room above the bakehouse. Widow Penn will take you for a fortnight on the promise of work. After that I will manage." "Yes." He closed the ledger. "I imagined you would say so." Outside on the stair, she stood a long moment with the Bible pressed against her ribs. Below, in the square, 2 men were unloading barrels from a cart, and a boy was chasing a goose, and 3 women at the pump had turned to watch her come down. She heard the word inheritance, and then the word nothing, and then a laugh, low and unashamed. "2 shillings, one of the women said, loud enough to carry. 2 shillings and a book she cannot eat." "He might have left her the shirt off his back," said another. "Only he sold that too." Sarah did not turn her head. She walked past them with the same unhurried step her mother had taught her long ago, when the world had first begun to be unkind, and she did not stop until she reached the bakehouse door and the smell of yeast and hot brick rose up to meet her like a memory. That night, in a room the size of a coffin, on a straw mattress that smelled faintly of mice, Sarah untied the handkerchief and laid the 2 shillings on the sill. She laid the Bible beside them. She did not open it. Not yet. She only looked at it a long while by the light of a single tallow candle that guttered whenever the wind found its way beneath the door. Was this truly all he had? Was there anything at all inside those worn pages worth an old woman's warning at a lich gate? And why, if he had nothing, had he mended the spine so carefully, with stitches placed as if the book itself were the treasure? Stay with us. Leave a word below and tell us where you are listening from. And if this village and this girl have found their way into you, tap the bell and follow along. Because what Sarah Brooks discovered when she finally opened those pages is only 3 nights away now, and the wind is already turning. Morning came gray and low, with rain smoking on the slates and the ovens already breathing beneath the floorboards. Widow Penn set Sarah to scrubbing the long deal table, then to carrying flour, then to sweeping ash from the mouths of the ovens, and Sarah did each thing without complaint. Her sleeves pushed to the elbow, her hands going red and then rough by mid-morning. Widow Penn watched her a while from the doorway and said only, "You work quiet, girl, like your father." Then she went back to her loaves and did not speak again until noon. The village came and went past the bakehouse window. Sarah could hear it more than see it. The clop of a shod horse, the rattle of a barrel iron, the sharp voices of women bargaining for the morning batch. She heard her own name twice before the church bell struck 11. Once it was said kindly, as a question. The second time it was followed by laughter. By afternoon, the news of her had thickened. A carter's boy came to the window on some errand and stared at her openly until Widow Penn shooed him. 2 farm wives buying penny loaves went silent when Sarah passed with the broom, and then began again the instant she turned her back. "That's her then. 2 shillings, they say. Poor Tom. He might have thought of the girl. He did think of her. He left her a Bible she cannot spend." Sarah kept sweeping. Late in the day, when the light through the small window had gone the color of weak tea, the door opened, and a broad man in a good coat filled the frame. He did not stoop for the beam, though he ought to have, and struck his hat against it and cursed once, comfortably, as a man curses in a room he considers his own. Widow Penn dipped her head. "Mr. Marston." Sarah did not know the name, but she knew the coat. She had seen its like on the men her father used to touch his cap to on market days. Mr. Marston looked around the bakehouse as though counting the loaves, and then his eye found Sarah and stayed. "So this is Tom Brooks's girl." "It is," said Widow Penn. "Come back for her fortune." He laughed. One short sound that was not a laugh. "Well, a book and 2 shillings will not carry her far. She had best learn to knead, Mrs. Penn. That is honest bread on the table, which is more than her father managed at the end." He turned the coin of his watch chain between finger and thumb. "Tell her, if she has any thought of the debt at the coal merchant's, that I bought the account off him yesterday, and I am not a patient man." "She has no debt to you," said Widow Penn, low. "She has the debt of her name," said Mr. Marston, and looked at Sarah as though waiting for her to speak. Sarah did not speak. She had learned young that a closed mouth is a locked door. Mr. Marston seemed to take her silence for slowness, and his mouth curled. "2 shillings and a book," he said, almost gently. "It is a mercy the girl has any wits at all." He touched his hat and stooped out. The bakehouse was quiet a long moment. Widow Penn set a hot loaf on the board, with more force than was needed, and said, half to herself, half to Sarah, "That man buys what he cannot inherit." Then, as though catching herself, she pushed the loaf toward Sarah and said only, "Eat." Outside, along the wet lane, an old voice Sarah did not recognize was saying to no one in particular, "The book, girl. The book was the labor of his last year." But when Sarah went to the door and looked, there was only the mist and a lamplighter fumbling at his pole, and the words might have been the wind. That night, the rain thickened into a steady, thoughtful rain, and Sarah climbed the narrow stair to her coffin-sized room with a heel of the day's bread and a mug of milk. Widow Penn had pressed into her hand, without a word. She set the bread on the sill beside the 2 shillings. She set the mug on the floor. She sat on the mattress and drew the Bible into her lap and held it there, still unopened, feeling the mended spine under her thumb. She did not open it. She was not yet ready to be disappointed by it, and she was not yet ready to be surprised. She only sat with it as one sits with a person who has just come in from a long journey and cannot yet speak. The candle guttered. The rain moved along the tiles above her head with the sound of many small feet. Beneath the floor, the ovens ticked as they cooled. She thought of her father's hands, long, knuckled, patient, hands that had mended harness and split kindling, and at the last sat empty on a coverlet, while his breath went out of him one small sip at a time. Hands that had stitched a linen strip along a cracked spine with the same care he had used on a saddle girth. She turned the book over. The stitches were neat and small, spaced as a bootmaker spaces them, not as a man mends a book for reading, but as a man mends a thing that must hold something. The second night was colder. She worked the day through, ate at Widow Penn's table with 2 apprentices who would not meet her eye, and went up to the room with wind rattling the shutter. She laid the Bible on the mattress beside her head and blew out the candle. She could not sleep at once. She listened to the house speak. She listened to the wind pry at the roof and to a dog bark somewhere down the lane, and to the slow settling of timbers that had held the same weight for 100 winters. She thought of the old woman at the lich gate. "Read the pages," he marked, "girl." She thought of Mr. Marston's watch chain and his easy contempt. She thought of her mother, dead these 7 years, who had once told her that a poor woman keeps her treasures in plain sight, because plain sight is the safest hiding place in the world. On the 3rd night, the rain stopped. The village went quiet. the way a village only goes quiet after long weather, with a hush so complete that Sarah could hear the tallow hiss where a drop of moisture had found the wick. She had eaten little. She had spoken less. Her hands hurt in the joints from lifting trays, and there was flour under her nails that no washing had taken out. She sat on the mattress with her back to the cold wall and drew the Bible into her lap. The candle threw its small yellow ring over the cover. The linen stitches along the spine caught the light like a row of tiny teeth. She had come to the end of what she could do by looking. She opened the book. She opened the book at the front, where a family always writes what it once remembered. The flyleaf was there, and on it in her father's careful hand were the two names she expected. Her mother's, with the year of her death, and her own, with the year of her birth. Below those, in the same hand but pressed harder into the paper, was a third line she had never seen. A place name, Ash Hollow, and beside it, in smaller letters, the words, the North Field. Nothing else. No date, no explanation, no coin of meaning to spend on it. Sarah passed her thumb over the ink. It did not smudge. It was old. She turned a few pages further. Here and there her father had marked verses with a thin pencil line down the margin, and the marks were not the marks of a man reading for comfort. They were placed with the exactness of a carpenter's notch. Genesis, where a man buys a field to bury his dead. Ruth, where a kinsman redeems a piece of ground. Jeremiah, where a deed of purchase is sealed and hidden in an earthen vessel that it may continue many days. She read that last verse 3 times. The candle guttered and steadied. She did not know yet what to make of it, and she was too tired to force the knowing. She closed the book on her finger, then opened it again to be sure of what she had seen, then closed it fully and set it on the sill beside the 2 shillings and the heel of bread. She lay down. She did not sleep at once. Below the floorboards, the ovens ticked as they cooled, small metallic sounds like a clock kept by no one. A field, she thought. A north field. Her father had never owned a field. Her father had owned a cart and a set of harness tools and the shirt he was buried in. She turned her face to the wall. Somewhere in the dark, a cat moved across the boards of the bakehouse below with the soft, flat sound cats make. And she remembered, without meaning to, that Widow Penn kept an old gray tom that had lost half an ear to a badger years ago and slept on the flour sacks. The cat came up the stair the next morning as if he had always known her. He was thin along the spine, blunt in the face, and his good ear turned toward every sound in the house. He watched Sarah lace her boots. He watched her fold the coverlet. When she went down to the bakehouse, he came behind her, 3 steps back, and settled on a sack by the oven mouth as though he had assigned himself the post. Widow Penn saw him and said only, "He has taken to you then," and went back to her dough. His name, she said when Sarah asked, was Ash. He had been in the bakehouse longer than she had. That day Sarah worked harder than the day before. She scrubbed the deal table until the grain rose pale under her cloth. She swept the ash from the oven mouths and carried it out to the ash pit behind the yard. She fetched water from the pump twice, 3 times, 4, and each time she passed the 3 women there, they stopped speaking and watched her go. She carried flour. She carried loaves. She kneaded when Widow Penn told her to knead, and her wrists learned the weight. The cat. Ash followed her from station to station, laying himself down at whatever corner she had made her own, blinking slow and steady as a lamp trimmed low. While her hands worked, her mind worked with them. The North Field. She turned the phrase in her head, the way Mr. Marston had turned the coin on his chain. Her father had lived his last years in a rented cottage on the far side of the parish, a cottage Sarah had visited only twice as a girl. There was no field attached to it. There had been a strip of garden the width of a grave and a lean-to for the cart. If there was a north field belonging to Thomas Brooks anywhere in Ash Hollow, she had never heard it spoken of, and neither, plainly, had Mr. Harrow, who had told her in his upstairs office that there was no property. At the noon rest, she went up to her room and opened the Bible again in daylight. The marked verses were as she had left them. She turned further. In the middle of the book, where the paper was softest with handling, she found a leaf whose edge did not sit flush with the others. She pressed the pages flat. The leaf lifted a hair's breadth. Something had been slipped between two pages, and the pages had been pressed back together under weight for a long time. She could feel the small extra thickness under her thumb. She did not open to it. She closed the book carefully, as one closes a door on a sleeping child, and went back down the stair. That afternoon she asked Widow Penn, keeping her voice level, if she knew where her father had walked on his days of rest. Widow Penn considered the question with a lump of dough between her palms. "He walked out toward the north end most Sundays," she said at last. "Past the old drover's road. He did not say what for. Your father did not say much." She slapped the dough down. "Why do you ask, girl?" "No reason," Sarah said. It was the first untruth she had spoken in Ash Hollow, and it sat on her tongue like a chip of coal. She went back to her sweeping. The cat watched her from the flour sack with his one good ear. Outside, the bell of the church struck 4, then the quarter, then the half. She thought of the leaf that would not lie flat. She thought of the words continue many days. She swept until the floor showed its pale boards again, and the ovens had cooled to the temperature of a summer stone. And only then, when the last apprentice had gone home and Widow Penn had climbed to her own bed with a lamp, did she put down the broom, take up the tallow candle, and climb the stair to her room with Ash padding silently behind her. She set the candle on the sill beside the 2 shillings, and the small flame doubled itself in the black window. Ash leapt onto the mattress without a sound and folded his paws beneath him. Sarah sat cross-legged on the coverlet and drew the Bible into her lap. Her hands were not steady. She wiped them once on her skirt and opened the book to the place where the leaf would not lie flush. The pages parted with a small, dry sigh, as if they had held their breath a long while. Between them lay a folded square of paper, thicker than the leaves that hid it, its edges browned where the Bible had pressed them. The paper had been folded 3 times. A red seal, no larger than a farthing, held the last fold shut. The seal had cracked across its middle, but its 2 halves still clung to the paper by habit. Sarah did not touch it at first. She looked at the shape of it against the print, at the way it had shifted the words of the page beneath and left a faint darkening in the shape of itself upon them. She thought, quite clearly, that she was about to know something she could not unknow. She lifted the paper out. It was heavier than she expected. She set it upon her knee and worked the folds open, one at a time, in the candlelight. The paper unfolded like a small linen cloth. Along its top, in a clerk's steady round hand, ran a line of ink black as new coal, an indenture of conveyance, dated 11 years past. The candle guttered. Ash pressed against her thigh. Sarah moved the flame closer. The names came out of the page in fragments as her eyes read them out of order. The seller, a name she did not know. The buyer, Thomas Brooks, of the parish of Ash Hollow, laborer. The parcel, 4 acres and a rood, being the north field bordering the old drover's road, together with the standing timber and the well at its northeast corner. The consideration, £42, paid in full. The witnesses, 2 whose signatures she could not make out. Below, a broader mark had been pressed into the wax, and beneath the wax, in a smaller hand, a note, dated only 2 winters back. Mortgage discharged in full, T. Brooks, his mark. Sarah read it through once and again and once more. Her hands began to shake, and she laid the paper flat on the Bible so that they would not spoil it. £42. Her father had earned 12 shillings a week when the work was good, and 9 when it was not. £42 was the labor of years. £42 was the coat he had not bought, and the doctor he had not called, and the coal he had not ordered the winter her mother took her fever. She understood then why her father had died owing the miller and the coal merchant, and yet had left her something in plain sight. He had spent everything he had on a field, and had held it clear of debt, and had told no one, not even his daughter, because a poor man's secret only kept if no one knew he had one. He had hidden the deed inside the pages his neighbors would not think to look between, and he had marked the verses that told her, if she read them, what a man does when he buys ground to leave to his own. Sarah put her forehead down upon the open Bible and wept without sound. Ash pressed harder against her side. The candle burned lower. Outside the wind had died, and the village slept, and in her lap lay 4 acres and a rood of Ash Hollow earth that her father had bought with the bones of his back and given to her in a book she could not spend. She did not sleep that night. She sat against the wall with the deed folded once more inside the Bible and the Bible held against her chest, and she watched the tallow shrink in its dish. When the first gray came into the shutter, she rose, washed her face in the tin cup's worth of cold water she had carried up, and went down to the bakehouse to knead the morning's dough, as if nothing at all had changed. By the 3rd day she had walked out past the old drover's road, alone, with Ash carried the last of the way inside her shawl, because he would not be left. The north field lay where the deed had said it lay. It was neither large nor beautiful. A hedgerow ran along its southern edge, thick with blackthorn. A well stood at the northeast corner, its stone lip green with moss and its bucket rope rotted through. 4 acres of good clay, sloping gently to the south, empty of stock and grown over with docks and thistle. Sarah walked the boundary in the wet grass. She laid her hand on the wellstone. She said nothing aloud, because there was no one to say it to, but she named the field in her mind as her father's, and then, more slowly, as her own. Word traveled. She had asked one careful question of Mr. Harrow that morning, and Mr. Harrow, receiving the folded paper across his desk, had lifted his spectacles and set them down again, and said only, "Well, well, Miss Brooks," in a voice she had not heard from him before. He had promised to search the parish register that afternoon. By evening, the wheelwright's boy had told his mother, and by the next dusk, half of Ash Hollow knew that Tom Brooks's girl had walked into the solicitor's office with a deed to 4 acres and a rood. The storm came the 4th night, and Mr. Marston came with it. The rain began at dark, and by 9 o'clock was blowing in sheets against the shutters. The wind took a slate from the bakehouse roof and threw it into the yard, where it broke like a plate. Widow Penn cursed once and climbed to her bed with a bucket. Sarah lay in her room with the Bible under her pillow, and the deed inside the Bible and Ash warm against her feet, and she listened to the weatherwork at the timbers that had held 100 winters. A little before 11 she heard boots on the stair, not Widow Penn's soft tread, a man's boots, deliberate, wet. She sat up. The latch of her door lifted. Mr. Marston stood in the doorway in his good coat. drenched black at the shoulders, water running off the brim of his hat onto her floorboards. He carried no candle. Behind him the stairwell was dark. He looked at her a long moment before he spoke. "You will sell me that paper, girl," he said. "Tonight." Sarah drew the coverlet up to her waist. Ash rose along her thigh with his back arched and made a low sound in his throat. She did not answer. Mr. Marston stepped into the room. "Your father borrowed of me once," he said. "Long ago. A matter of £8. I forgave it, out of Christian feeling. That field is mortgaged to me in kind, whether the paper says so or not." He took a purse from his coat and set it on the sill beside the 2 shillings. £15, more than the land will yield you in 10 years. Take it and go back where you were sent." "No," Sarah said. It was the first word she had spoken to him. He stared at her. Then he took up the purse again and struck the sill with it so that the 2 shillings jumped. "You will regret this by morning," he said. He turned on the stair, and as he turned, a cry came from the yard below, thin through the wind, a woman's voice, and then a child's. Sarah was on her feet before she knew it, with the Bible in her hand. She pushed past Mr. Marston on the narrow stair, past his wet sleeve and his breath, and went down into the rain barefoot with Ash at her heels. A woman she did not know was on her knees in the yard beside a fallen handcart, holding a small boy against her chest. The child's face was white as tallow. The woman was a tinker's wife. Sarah would learn later, driven off the road by the storm and struck by the flying slate. Sarah knelt in the mud, took the child from her, and carried him inside the bakehouse to the warm bricks by the oven mouth. She sent Widow Penn, waked now, for hot water. She wrapped the woman in the coverlet from her own bed. She did not think once of the deed folded in the Bible she had left on the stair. Mr. Marston stood in the doorway a moment longer, watching. Then, without a word, he pulled his hat low and went out into the rain. By morning the storm had blown itself thin, and the yard lay strewn with slate and small branches and the wreckage of the tinker's handcart. Sarah had not slept. The boy had. He lay on a folded sack by the oven mouth with color returned to his cheeks, and his mother sat beside him with Widow Penn's shawl about her shoulders and a mug of tea between her hands. When the tinker himself came at first light, hollow-eyed and hoarse from calling along the lanes, he took off his hat at the bakehouse door and did not put it on again. He looked at Sarah and could not speak. He set a small tin box on the deal table, which was all he had to give, and closed her fingers around it before he went to his wife. Sarah returned the Bible to her lap on the stair. The deed was still folded inside it, dry, the cracked red seal unmoved. She carried both across the square to the wheelwright stairs a little after 9. Mr. Harrow was already at his desk. He had a broad ledger open before him and a page of the parish register laid beside it, and when Sarah came in, he stood up, which he had not done the first time. "Miss Brooks," he said, "sit down." He read the deed again in daylight slowly, tracing each line with his forefinger, and then he set his spectacles on the ledger and looked at her. "It is good," he said. "It is entered. Your father registered it the summer after he bought it. The mortgage was raised the next spring and paid off 2 winters back, exactly as the note says. 4 acres and a rood, the north field, in the name of Thomas Brooks, laborer of this parish." He paused. "And now, by his hand and by law, in yours." Sarah did not weep in his office. She thanked him and asked what she owed. "Mr. Harrow said, 'Nothing today.' And then, more quietly, 'He came here often, your father. He came to be sure the paper was safe. I did not know why until this morning. Word moved through Ash Hollow faster than Sarah walked back across the square. At the pump, the three women did not speak as she passed, and one of them, the youngest, gave a small nod that she had not given before. The carter's boy stopped in the lane and pulled off his cap and did not know what to do with it. Two farm wives who had bought penny loaves the first day stepped aside for her at the bakehouse door and murmured, "Miss Brooks," as though the name had grown heavier overnight. At noon, Mr. Marston came into the bakehouse. He wore the same good coat, dried now and brushed, and he carried his hat in both hands. He did not turn the coin on his chain. He looked at Widow Penn and then at Sarah and said, "I spoke ill of your father. I spoke ill last night of you. I withdraw the £8. There was no debt." He set the words down like a man setting down a heavy bucket. He did not ask forgiveness, and Sarah did not offer it, and neither of them was diminished by the omission. He touched his hat at the door and went out into the square, and the men unloading barrels watched him go and said nothing. That afternoon, the vicar came, and the miller's wife, and an old drover who had known Thomas Brooks as a boy and wanted only to shake Sarah's hand. The old woman from the Lich Gate did not come, and when Sarah asked after her, Widow Penn said no one of that description lived in the parish that she knew. Sarah let the question rest. Ash slept on the flour sacks with one good ear turned toward the door. By the end of the week, Sarah had walked the north field 3 more times, once with Mr. Harrow, once with the tinker who mended the well rope in a single afternoon and would take no coin, and once alone at evening with Ash inside her shawl. She stood at the well and looked south across 4 acres and a rood of good clay, and she thought of her father's hands, stitching linen along a cracked spine by candlelight, mending something that must hold something. By the end of the season, she had a 2-room cottage rising at the field's south corner, timber cut from the standing wood her father had bought with the land, the frame raised by men from the village who would not name a price. Widow Penn baked the loaves for the raising. The tinker's wife brought butter. Mr. Harrow brought a small iron latch for the door and would not say who had paid for it. The wheelwright's boy carried water. The 3 women at the pump, when Sarah passed them now, said, "Good day, Miss Brooks," and meant it. On an evening in early autumn, when the light lay gold along the hedgerow and the blackthorn shadows reached long across the clay, Sarah stood at the well with Ash at her feet and the Bible in her hands. The deed was in Mr. Harrow's safe now. The 2 shillings were in a small tin on the cottage sill, untouched. She turned the Bible in her hands and felt the linen stitches along its spine, small and even, spaced like a bootmaker's. A neighbor passing on the drover's road called across the hedge and asked what she would call the place. Sarah looked at the field and at the well and at the low walls of the cottage, catching the last of the sun. "My father's Patience," she said. The neighbor nodded as though he had heard her clearly and went on. Ash pressed his head against her ankle. Somewhere down the lane a bell rang for evening, and the light on the clay turned from gold to the color of a banked coal, and Sarah stood a while longer before she went inside. Thank you for staying to the end of this quiet story. A story about what a father hides in plain sight, and what a daughter is patient enough to find. If it moved you, leave a kind word in the comments, share where you are watching from, and subscribe so the next tale finds you when the lamps are lit. Rest well. Another story is already waiting.